Bad news. From goodness to badness. Yep, Julian Assange. The feds are going to eat him alive today. They announced 17 new charges against the WikiLeaks founder that could land him in prison for a long time, like Michael Avenatti time. Assange is currently locked up in London after cops dragged him out of the Ecuadorian embassy, kicking and screaming. You remember that last month? He was previously charged with computer intrusion for allegedly helping former U.S. Army analyst Chelsea Manning crack a DoD password. But these new charges accuse him of violating the U.S. Espionage Act for his role in allegedly obtaining and publishing classified info from Manning. And now prosecutors want the Brits to extradite him here. WikiLeaks responding today, tweeting, "This is madness. It is the end of national security journalism and the First Amendment." So is Assange a crook, or is he just a journalist trying to do his job? The panel is back. David Bruno, Antoine Seawright, Jimmy Fala. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Hey.
So let's talk about the legal ramifications here, because it does seem as though he's got a very clear First Amendment defense.
He does have a very good defense. Pentagon Papers, United States Supreme Court, it was New York Times, and they said journalists they can publish stolen data, classified data. So yes, but he's a little different, because the allegation is that he actually participated in the hack. That was the first indictment in April. Now the superseding indictment is going to
But there are a lot of journalists who've come out and said, hey, I have really tried to persuade sources, and I've gone back to them and asked, can't you try and get a little bit more information? And they argue that's what good journalists do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Are we going to see these defenses? Who knows? Because first he has to be extradited. And Sweden has a rape charge against him, and UK has to make a decision.
That was actually dismissed, but they're talking about reopening that investigation.
Right. So, but he has to be extradited. And for the extradition, there is a political crime exception that they may rely on. They may say that this is political motivated. And if so, UK may not actually extradite. So first has to come the extradition. And then if he gets here, then we will determine whether or not there's a First Amendment defense to the crimes.
How do Democrats feel about this?
Well, I think most Democrats, and even some Republicans, at least the one I talked to, part of their big problem is he's being considered a journalist. And we've had this discussion.
Okay, but that's a really great question. Who decides what a journalist is?
Well, when we look at what a journalist, who most of us would identify as a journalist, we would not put him in this category.
Why not?
I believe that just because I cook chicken doesn't mean I'm a top-notch chef, and I may make chicken well. And just because he does whatever he thinks he does well doesn't make him a journalist. I just don't think we should put him in the category of journalist. And that's been the big thing. And so to the point...
But that's very problematic, because you could say conservative bloggers are not journalists because you don't like the material that they put out there. So how do we decide? Because I don't think we've come up with an acceptable criterion for...
I don't think there's a technical definition, but I think that we can use...
Well, that's a problem then, because you're using the word as though everyone is using it in the same way.
Well, I think that most people who are in this business know what a journalist is, someone who's fair and balanced, straight down the line. There's no wiggle one way or the other. I just don't think we can say that about it.
I think that you could have varying definitions. Pamela Anderson.
Well, that's my working theory on this, because I once got to work with Pamela Anderson on a project,
right.
And I know that those two are chummy, and my working theory is that he wanted to get arrested after spending a few weeks with her and called up the feds. He's like, you guys got to have a dragnet around here or something. I've done some bad stuff. Can we acknowledge what a bad week it is for celebrity cats, by the way? Grumpy Cat died. Now we've got Assange's celebrity embassy cat.
We don't even know where the thing is.
It's just gone now.
It's like David Miscavige's wife, Shelley.
He hasn't been seen in forever. No. Was last being audited for stress in the subway. I love when they do that.
Did you see the guy feeding Chinese food to the rat in the subway?
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Did you see the guy? I know this is very off
topic. We got a little off message here.
Please,
but stick with
forgive me, but we're going somewhere. Did you, speaking of the New York Post, the greatest publication in the history of mankind, the man who shot himself in the Tic Tac sack?
He did.
Because he was trying to hide the drugs in his anus?
In his buttocks.
Yeah.
And they wound up determining.
Bruno's shaking his head. Bruno's like, I want to represent the guy.
Can I weigh in on this? Because the man was arrested for trafficking heroin in his buttocks.
It was actually marijuana.
But he marijuana, and he said he did no marijuana, but clearly has a crack problem, if you will. Hey. There it is.
That's actually what you get, Jimmy.
No. Snare drum sold separately.
Man,
Come on.
panel Thursday. You guys, thank you so much, David, Antoine, and Jimmy. Well,
Today, the Trump administration announced new criminal charges for Julian Assange. This is the second round of charges. The first did not indict Assange for publishing classified material, but instead alleged that he sought to aid in the actual hacking of a government password, which, if true, clearly isn't protected by the First Amendment. Quoting from the first indictment, to knowingly access a computer without authorization and exceeding authorized access. Now, today's indictment is different. It charges Assange under the 1917 Espionage Act, which is a terrible piece of legislation passed during the first Red Scare and rife for governmental abuse. The charge is that his publishing of classified information itself violated the act, stating that Assange, WikiLeaks affiliates, and Manning shared the common objective to subvert lawful restrictions on classified information and to publicly disseminate it. That's according to the indictment. This is, to put it bluntly, wrong, unconstitutional, and downright tyrannical. If Assange's publishing of classified information runs afoul of the law, so does the work of just about every single serious press outlet, this one included. The First Amendment protects the basic right of a free press and a free people to publish truthful information about matters of public import, whether the government likes it or not. Classified information is a category for those who work for the state, not for those of us in civil society. In fact, the Obama administration had actually considered charges of precisely this kind, but ultimately concluded it would violate the First Amendment and have an intolerably destructive effect on the free press. As the Washington Post reported back in November 2013, justice officials said they looked hard at Assange, but realized that they have what they described as a New York Times problem. If the Justice Department indicted Assange, it would also have to prosecute the New York Times and other news organizations and writers who published classified material. Now, this administration, of course, has no such reservations. The president's been calling the press the enemy of the people for years, and now his hand-picked attorney general, fresh off of covering the president's tracks, is sicking the power of the DOJ on potentially every single news outlet in the country. Just what it all means is next. For the first time ever, the Espionage Act has been invoked against the publication of truthful information about the government. In an indictment listing 17 new counts against Julian Assange, the Justice Department attempts to distinguish the WikiLeaks founder from traditional news outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post, but many legal scholars say those distinctions fall flat. I want to bring in Jamil Jaffer, who's executive director of the Knight First Amendment Institute, Columbia University, former deputy legal director at ACLU, and co-led litigation teams that compelled the Bush administration to disclose the torture memos. Also with me tonight, Adam Serworth, staff writer for The Atlantic, who's written extensively on press and free speech. Adam, let me start with you. You were outspoken on this immediately, and I think there's a lot of people who don't follow this closely and really view Assange as a bad actor. They view him as odious, and particularly the role that WikiLeaks played in 2016. What do you say to those people?
That's why this is the perfect venue for Trump to set a precedent for prosecuting the people he really wants to prosecute. He's picked Assange precisely because liberals loathe him and blame him so much for the elevation of an authoritarian racist president. But what he's attempting here is attempting to expand his powers so that he can go after the very journalists who have been exposing his corruption for the past 3 years.
There's a tell here, which is interesting to me, that you've got these two sets of indictments, right? So the first doesn't touch. There's always this sort of question lurking in the background, that 2013 reporting I read about, like, you know, what do you encroach? They managed to indict him in a way that didn't seem to do that.
Right.
And now you got these. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, the first indictment did mention the Espionage Act. It basically said that the violation of this other statute, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, was in furtherance of an Espionage Act violation. And so it already sort of raised the specter that something like this was coming. But this is really what free speech and free press advocates have been worrying about. You know, this is the first time in 100 years that the Espionage Act has been used. I mean, since the act became law, first time it's been used against a publisher for publishing information of public concern. And it really does cross a new frontier. You had the Bush administration begin prosecuting leakers as spies, and then you had the Obama administration prosecute more Espionage Act cases than all previous administrations combined, but none of those prosecutions involved a publisher. Now we have a publisher.
I just want to be clear on that distinction, right? The people that were prosecuted were people that had done the leaking.
That's right.
And were, I think in all cases, government employees.
That's right.
Who were, the government said, bound by the classification, system.
Yeah, there was one other case that involved APAC. It fell apart.
Right.
But otherwise, yes, that's right. They were all leakers. They were government employees or otherwise bound by the government's classification system. This is not that kind of case. It really is crossing a new, and in my view, very dangerous frontier.
Adam, it also strikes me as a kind of message indictment. I mean, for the reasons you said. I mean, it's not an accident that the president who says, look at these scoundrels there at the back of the room, who calls the press the enemy of the people, who has, stopped briefings, who is not allowing any information to come out for congressional oversight, that this lands with Bill Barr at the helm of it.
It's not a coincidence at all. And I think what people need to understand is this does not mean an end to the leaking of classified information. Nope. What this means is that the government will leak the information selectively that it wants to be able to manipulate people politically, but journalists who obtain information for people who are trying to show that the government is not being honest or is doing something illegal or wrong, those people will be prosecuted for reporting those stories. So what this is essentially making it one-sided so that the government can manipulate the public using classified information anytime it wants to, and the public absolutely has no response.
In fact, this comes on the night that the president has given the power to declassify Attorney General Bill Barr as he runs this investigation of the origins of the counterintelligence probe in 2016. And to Adam's point, it does seem like there's now a profound asymmetry if this case goes forward.
Right. I think that's the whole point. I think Adam is right that this is about allowing the government to selectively disclose. It's about control of information. Everybody knows, or they should know, that but for the kind of journalism that will be chilled by this indictment, we wouldn't know nearly as much as we do about the Bush administration's interrogation abuses. We wouldn't know about the Obama administration's drone program. We wouldn't know about warrantless wiretapping. There's tons of stuff we wouldn't know about government conduct and government policy that the public has a right to know. And this indictment is, I think, meant to send a message to the very journalists who do that kind of reporting.
Maybe a dumb and technical legal question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you have to wait for the trial and some verdict to then appeal it on the grounds of the First Amendment, or can Assange's attorneys do that now?
No, I don't think they can do it now. I think they would have to wait. I mean, it's not even clear that he's going to be brought to the United States.
Right.
Yeah, but you don't need a prosecution in order to send a very chilling message
that's
to
the
news
problem.
organizations,
Right, exactly.
right? And that's the real worry, that even without this trial moving forward, even one step, the indictment itself is going to send a very chilling message.
Yeah, this is a four-alarm situation. This is a very, very big deal what happened today. Jamil Jaffer and Adam Serworth, thank you, gentlemen, both.
Thank you.
That is all right now. Good evening, Rachel.
That was a really, really, really important and really good segment on that topic. And having both of those guys here were exactly the right people to hear from. And that was super. I'm about to talk about this same story. But that was super edifying.
I'm glad you are. Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big one.
I think I share your four-alarm sense about this. I think it's interesting to me this hasn't sort of taken over the news cycle all day today. I think it may.
I think partly because of the weirdness of that first set of indictments that it was superseding. If they led with this, it would have been a bigger story out of the gate. It's a weird thing they did there.
It is a weird thing. I think it's going to have some weird consequences in the short order, but I'll get to that now. Thank you, my friend. Well done. Thanks to at home for joining us this hour. I'm happy to have you with us. And as I mentioned to Chris, I am sort of surprised that this story is not more wall-to-wall everywhere right now. I do think in coming days, as people really absorb what this new indictment means, it may end up being as big a story as it deserves to be. As you by now may have heard, the WikiLeaks guy, Julian Assange, has been newly indicted. Last month, he was taken out of that embassy in London, where he'd been hiding for the past few years, trying to avoid criminal prosecution in multiple countries. It looks like Sweden is pursuing rape charges against him now. The UK has prosecuted him and now jailed him for jumping bail. But when he was pulled out of that embassy last month, he was charged in the United States with a computer hacking charge. He was specifically charged for helping a U.S. soldier, who's now named Chelsea Manning, helping her try to break a password, basically to cover up unauthorized access to classified materials, which Manning was illegally downloading from a Defense Department computer for the purpose of sending them to WikiLeaks to publish. Now, the U.S. laid that charge against Julian Assange. They said they wanted to bring Assange to trial on that charge here in the United States. But he is not here in the United States. He's in the UK. And the UK has to decide whether or not they are going to extradite, whether or not they are going to ship him over here to face that criminal charge. That was the situation heading into today. Now, today, apparently the United States government has decided maybe they don't want the UK to extradite Julian Assange here to ever face trial. Or at least that would appear to be the intriguing, fascinating, and very worrying bottom line of this remarkable thing that the Justice Department did today when they unsealed a new superseding indictment, so an additional indictment against Assange. Only this time, it is not the same kind of criminal allegation they made against him in the initial indictment. It's not some hacking computer crime like they originally charged him with. Now, as of today, they are charging him with 17 counts under the Espionage Act. And these new charges are not about stealing classified information or outsmarting computer security systems in order to illegally obtain classified information. It's not about that. These new charges are trying to prosecute Assange for publishing that stolen secret material, which was obtained by somebody else. And that is a whole different kettle of fish than what he was initially charged with. There has never in this country been a successful prosecution under the Espionage Act of some third party for publishing something that somebody else stole or something that otherwise made its way out of the government while the government was trying to keep it secret. We've never in this country successfully charged somebody for publishing secret material. But by charging Assange for publishing that stuff that was taken by Manning, by issuing these 17 charges today, the Justice Department has just done something you might have otherwise thought was impossible. The Justice Department today, the Trump administration today, just put every journalistic institution in this country on Julian Assange's side of the ledger, on his side of the fight, which I know is unimaginable. But that is because the government is now trying to assert this brand new right to criminally prosecute people for publishing secret stuff. And newspapers and magazines and investigative journalists and all sorts of different entities publish secret stuff all the time. That is the bread and butter of what we do. Right? There is a reason, it's called the First Amendment, that the U.S. government has never successfully made that a crime before. But here, with Assange, they are trying to do it. And as a matter of law, this is not at all about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks doing what they did in the 2016 election. This is not related to them working with Russian intelligence material in 2016 to try to help Trump win the election and to try to hurt Hillary Clinton. This is not about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange personally strategizing with Trump campaign staffers about how to beat Hillary Clinton as they were releasing all that information stolen by the Russians. I mean, these new charges have nothing to do with that. These new charges also, frankly, have nothing to do with the nature of the material that WikiLeaks published from the Chelsea Manning documents in 2010. What this is now a novel legal effort to punch a huge hole in the First Amendment by labeling it spying, labeling it criminal espionage to publish secret stuff in a country where we have a long, proud journalistic history of journalistic entities publishing secret stuff. And of course, this comes conveniently at a time when this administration, this president personally, is calling the press the enemy of the people. The president this week gleefully saying out loud at a political rally that his new attorney general is looking at bringing criminal charges and bringing criminal investigations against the president's personal enemies. The president expressing glee about that this week at a political rally that he likes his new attorney general for doing that. And I'm sure this president would love to establish a new legal doctrine, a whole new legal lane for the U.S. government that's never existed before, where anyone who publishes stuff the government doesn't want published gets prosecuted by the Justice Department under the most serious statutes imaginable, facing long prison terms for doing it. I'm sure this president would want that. I'm sure he is absolutely stupefied that he doesn't already have that power. But he doesn't have that power. He's never had it before. No president has. And this is the president who's saying that, the FBI is committing treason and the press is the enemy of the people. I'm sure he'd be happy to say that the press is committing treason too, and espionage and all the rest of it. But what's going to happen next here is going to be fascinating, because in order to pursue this prosecution, the United States will have to persuade Great Britain, our great ally, that they should extradite Julian Assange here to face these new charges. And from the UK's perspective, obviously the UK and the US have an incredibly important and close relationship that extends absolutely to having close and cooperative relationships on all sorts of law enforcement and intelligence matters. But I think there may be reason to not expect automatic British deference on something like this. For one thing, however special the relationship is between the US and the UK, it may have become considerably less special once we inaugurated a new president who heads a new White House where they literally can't even spell the name Theresa May, who is Prime Minister of the UK. It's not like it's a tough name. They really can't manage it, ever. Theresa May right now, frankly, also has bigger fish to fry. Her role as Prime Minister is uncertain. The future of her government is very uncertain. British politics has not teetered like this in a very long time, but it teeters right now, perhaps more precipitously than ever, thanks to the Brexit disaster that, incidentally, our own president has loudly supported and tried to link to his own presidential campaign. And honestly, even if the US-UK relationship were as strong as ever, the Brits really do have an unequivocally independent judiciary and legal system that was always going to consider this extradition request critically, because it was always going to be controversial. It was controversial even when it was just the one computer hacking crime, right? Now that it's espionage? It will not help the American case to extradite Julian Assange that the U.S. is trying something totally novel on him, right? The U.S. has never successfully brought these kinds of charges ever before. In general, I'm going to tell you the bottom line here is stay tuned on this, but I think these 17 espionage charges against the WikiLeaks guy are a huge deal and a very dark development. Chris Hayes this evening called it a 4-alarm development. I absolutely share that. And I know you. Given everything else that we know about the WikiLeaks guy, I can feel through the television right now your mixed feelings about what I am saying, right? I can feel what may be, perhaps, a certain lack of concern about Julian Assange's ultimate fate, right? Given his own gleeful and extensive personal role in trying to help a hostile foreign government interfere in our election in order to install their chosen president with WikiLeaks' help, right? I know. I feel ya. I got it. But it is a recurring theme in history. Heck, it is a recurring theme in the Bible that they always pick the least sympathetic figures to try this stuff on first. Despite anybody's feelings about this spectacularly unsympathetic character at the center of this now international drama, you are going to see every journalistic institution in this country, every First Amendment supporter in this country, left, right, and center, swallow their feelings about this particular human and denounce what the Trump administration is trying to do here, because it would fundamentally change the United States of America. It would fundamentally change the balance of power between the people and our government. But as I said, in the first instance, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Britain, because they're going to have first crack at this. My guess is that these radical new charges, this novel new effort by the Justice Department to turn publishing secret material into a violation of the Espionage Act for the first time ever, I think there's a good chance that will be viewed as controversial enough by UK authorities that it may preclude them from ever sending him over here to stand trial. They have rules of their own that preclude them from sending somebody to, for example, face a political prosecution. I don't know if that's how they will define this sort of thing, but they should recognize that what Assange is being charged with, regardless of how you feel about Assange, it is a fundamentally novel and radical thing that the Trump administration is trying to do. And that will matter to them when they make their extradition decision, which wasn't a sure thing anyway.